There we go. Okay. All righty. Looking at this picture. Okay, so we're going to call the meeting to order. It is 7:05 p.m. and we can start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, wonderful. And now we have public comments. Maura or Ralph, is there anybody in the meeting who we think is here for public comment?
There are no public comments, at least in the meeting group. So more, I believe there were none on email either.
No public comments on email.
Okay. So then, before we go to the superintendent's report, we have a little surprise because it is Dr. Adamowski's very last meeting as superintendent of Norwalk Public Schools. And so first I wanted to say, I have to scroll my screen so I can see you, Stephen. Where are you? I found you. Okay. First, I wanted to say thank you so very much for your service and your dedication and all of the hard work that you've done in the 5 years that you've been here with us at Norwalk. Thank you for staying for 5 years. That's been extremely helpful to have continuity and stability in that time. I have a little list of some of the greatest hits of things that were accomplished while you were here. And I will just go through some of my favorites. Implementing the next generation science standards and redesigning the gifted and talented program to make it really robust and open it up to a wider variety of our students and make it more equitable. Starting band instrument lessons at the elementary school level is something that I've really been happy about. Ensuring that our instructional programs in Norwalk are up to date and reflect best practices of what's happening and being at the leading edge of instructional practice. Expanding and establishing school governance councils so that individual schools have agency over their budgets and their communities and decisions that they make at the building level. Montessori pre-K, I was very psyched about that. We have the Dyslexia Center, the Specialized Learning and Literacy Center. Implementing restorative practices is something that's very dear to my heart. Making discipline and social emotional learning and focusing on the whole child in working through issues that children have. Upgrading our food service program. All of these things, so many things. And there's, I just thank you. And also, there will be a present coming to your house. It will not be there today, but it's on the way. So you can, when you see a package in the mail, don't be surprised. And I think also we have something else that's going to be presented to you. Is that right, Brenda?
Good evening, Dr. A. You know, we all wish that we could be standing close and side by side with you today to celebrate your retirement and to thank you from the bottom of our heart for your service to Norwalk. Those of us who have worked with you and been honored to be with you day by day have saw your work firsthand and your unyielding commitment to the children of Norwalk and to all of our children. So this evening, it is with great honor and gratitude this evening that on behalf of the children of Norwalk, we are going to give you a wonderful piece of artwork from the Norwalk Public Schools' first virtual art show from 2020.
Oh my goodness, that's beautiful. Look at that. Who's the artist?
Yes, this piece of artwork was crafted in colored pencils by Shirley Lynn during our COVID pandemic.
Oh,
She's
it's
an
beautiful.
educator from West Rocks Middle School in Ms. Fusarelli's class. The artwork is entitled Hope. I know it's a little hard to see up close in a virtual meeting, but I want you to know there is a child sitting at the end of the dock, looking over the water towards the sun. And in the sky, painted there, is the word hope. Dr. A, this is a fitting image to celebrate your service to Norwalk. Your dedicated work has given hope to all of us, to our community, to our school, but mostly to our children. This is dedicated to you with our love and admiration. and congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you, Brenda.
What a beautiful piece of art.
That's gorgeous. Beautiful.
And it's
Si-
absolutely perfect, Stephen, because it will be just like you sitting at the end. You're all
Well, I can certainly think about that. Thank you very much. That is, my God, I'm overwhelmed. That is so beautiful and it is so meaningful. And I thank you very, very much. You have a long agenda tonight. I'm not going to give you my swan song. I'm going to be in the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays, as I was today for the next several weeks, and next 2 weeks at least, and working from home from there. Let me just say thank you to you, members of the board. I've had the wonderful opportunity to work with great boards of education in the last 5 years. I want to, in particular, thank the chairs that I've had the opportunity to work with, Mr. Lyons, who I worked with the longest, Mr. Barbas, Dr. Kimmel, and now Ms. Lemieux. And so I have a great appreciation of the difficult volunteer work that you do on behalf of our community. And you have and will have my highest respect. I have been so blessed to work with such a strong team, most of whom I've had the opportunity to hire. And we have, I would put our senior management team against any in the state or the nation. And that has been just an incredible asset that has enabled any accomplishments that we have. I am most proud of the achievement gap being closed by about 2/3 on my watch, particularly amongst our highest need students, who are now doing better than high need students anywhere else in the state. So I have lots to be grateful for. I was grateful to be part of a very effective team that was able to accomplish a lot on behalf of our students. And I will be sending a message out to our staff, but you know, my best hope for all of the people that I've worked with is that you are able to come to work every day as I have, grateful to be able to do important, meaningful work and make a social difference. So thank you, and thank you for this wonderful gesture this evening.
I think Heidi also wanted to say something very quickly.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be brief. Stephen, I just, personally wanted to thank you, how you've served us well over the past 5 years. I appreciate your drive, your passion and leadership, as well as your late nights, very late nights, your vision for Nora Public Schools, for all of our students, parents, and staff. And I think it's a well-deserved break. And I'm looking at that beautiful painting that Dr. Myers had just presented, and I'm thinking of you as I'm looking at how relaxing that is and how peaceful it is. And I just wanted to give you a reminder, the first Tuesday and third Tuesday of the month, to make sure you watch YouTube. So make sure you're engaged and you watch us, so you'll still be part of the family here at Nora Public Schools. So again, we just appreciate everything you've done for us over the past 5 years. So thank you so much for your leadership.
Thank you very much.
Make sure to watch the meetings on YouTube. I'm sure you will. All right. So let's move into our actual agenda. The first thing is your report, Dr. A.
Yes, we have a lengthy report tonight because it is your last meeting until August. You'll just have a retreat meeting in July. So we have a lengthy report. We're going to try to be as brief as possible. Some of these are annual end of year reports that we have an obligation to present at this meeting. I wanted to say a few words on the progress of the school reopening task force. So we have most of the members lined up at this point. However, we have experienced a delay that is really due to some changes at the state level. Initially, when the commissioner asked each superintendent to organize a reopening task force, it was anticipated that all the advisements would come from the local health director, and districts would figure out how to do this under the conditions in each community. The governor now, however, has appointed a state school reopening task force. That reopening task force will provide advisements or parameters to local school districts, and we do not anticipate that we'll be receiving any of those until the middle of July. So I am working closely with Dr. Australia on this. The invitations and charge to the committee will go out to them sometime next week. I have shared the names with the officers. As soon as we get confirmation from the last remaining 2 or 3 people, we'll be able to make that public. I understand the board may also be of the mind to appoint a review committee of comprised of some community members and municipal officials that will also review the decisions and work and plan of the school opening task force. And so we are a little bit delayed, but not deterred. And the first meeting of the group will occur during the first week of July. So that will be on Dr. Australia's watch, but I've been happy and pleased to be able to put this group together in consultation with her. And I also am gratified by the large number of people who have stepped up, stepped forward, volunteered, offered to help. This is it really represents the best of Norwalk under a difficult and challenging situation. So thank you to all who have done that, and I'll be reporting further on this before the end of my term. We have as one of our goals this year, one of our outcomes, the improvement of chronic absenteeism rates. We have done fairly well in this area over the last several years, having improved significantly, as you know, from our state accountability plan. This is one of the measures of the state accountability plan. It's also one of our outcomes. And we're happy tonight to be able to get a review of the past year, as well as a comparison with the COVID distance learning period from Sandra Fiellos. So we're going to turn to Sandra, and she has some slides with the data that she is going to share with you.
Good evening, board members. Good evening, Mayor and my colleagues. I'm going to share my screen. So let's make sure that this works. Okay, how's that? Everyone can see this? Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Good.
Thank you so much. So good evening, everybody. Thank you. I'm going to try to make this brief, but I do want to tell you that it's a lot of good data, and I'm excited to be presenting this to you. And I know that this didn't go out with the board packet, but this presentation will be made available to you. I have a much more thorough one that probably would have taken us an hour to get through, that I'm glad to share with you, that goes into much more in depth. So please feel free to reach out to Dr. Adamowski or Dr. Costanzo if you're interested in receiving these slides. So I want to tell you that my relationship with chronic absenteeism became stronger this year as the director of school improvement, but it actually started quite a while back. I don't know how many of you guys know that I started at Briggs, and at Briggs, chronic absenteeism was something that we really strive to actually combat, because we knew that students that were going there already had these issues. And I brought those practices with me over to Brookside School. And now I get to present to you guys on a more district-wide lens. So as Dr. Adamowski said, part of our priorities were to close the gap in our chronic absenteeism data. And we wanted to reduce the chronic absenteeism data at the same rate of the state. And I think at this point, we're on pace with the state, but we still have some ways to go. We have been able to reduce it from 10.6% last year to 10.3% this year. But I want you to keep in mind that our demographic keeps changing, and we do end up having a population that typically suffers from greater absenteeism. So in us being able to reduce it at all is a major feat for our district, but we will continue to put in place some systems that we have found work well in some of our schools. Part of the vision is that we offer a safe and nurturing environment. So obviously chronic absenteeism is one of the ways that we evaluate how we're doing in these areas of our vision. As you know, chronic absenteeism is an indicator in our Next Gen Accountability Index, indicator 4A and 4B. You are able to get a maximum of 50 points for all students. And then there's a high need subgroup that actually gives you another opportunity to earn 50 points. This is critical for us because it's an area where we can actually really target and improve our accountability index. Now, this is a very complicated sort of slide, but what I wanted to explain to you is the definition of chronic absenteeism in Connecticut. So chronic absence is defined as missing 10% or more of school for reasons including excused, unexcused, and disciplinary absences. And there is a formula that you see here that equals the chronic absenteeism rate. So it's the student attendance rate equals the total number of days of attendance, so the total number of school days, and the number of days that the student was absent is divided by those number of school days, and this is how we come up with the chronic absenteeism rate. Now, chronic absence versus truancy, it's important for us to see that these terms are not interchangeable. When we measure chronic absenteeism, we're talking all absences versus truancy is typically, we refer to students that are truant that have unexcused absences. The important thing also to note with the chronic absenteeism rate is that it changes over time. So it's a moving target. It's always 10% of the number of school days. This is a national landscape sort of snapshot to just tell you that this is what it looks like nationally. And it won't surprise you that the breakdown looks pretty much the same for us. But I wanted to give you guys a national snapshot. The other presentation that I made that's much more comprehensive really goes into some national data, and it allows us to compare ourselves to what are the trends nationally. But I wanted to point out to you that students with disabilities, students that qualify for free and reduced lunch are the students that have the highest absenteeism rate. Then we have Hispanic students, EL students, Black students, and then white and students that pay for lunch. So this is a national snapshot. So how does NPS compare to the state? So the state is the yellow, Norwalk is the blue. You could see that in previous years, we were much lower than the state. And obviously being lower is best, right? You want a smaller number of students who are experiencing absences. We have increased and the state has remained relatively the same. However, our demographics have changed significantly and at a much faster rate than the state. So one thing that I will point out, in 2014, our ELL population was 11.6. Now our ELL population is slightly over 20%. Our special education population was 11.4. Now it's 14.5. And our free and reduced lunch in 2014 was 48.9%. And now it's, I think 62% was the last time that we checked. The state hasn't changed at the same rate. This is our absenteeism data broken down by race. And I'll just read you some points that I wanted to make from the national data that I was able to gather. And according to national data, Black students are 40% more likely, and Hispanic students are 17% more likely to lose a total of 3 weeks of schooling compared to their white counterparts. And the same seems to be trending here in Norwalk. If you look at our special education versus our non-special education students, you will see that the blue line is our non-special education students, or students that do not have an IEP, and the orange are students that have an individualized education plan. And you will see that students that have an IEP do suffer from greater absences. Now, the one thing that I will note is that as I was doing this research, we pulled that there are about 113 students in our frontline system that have medical conditions, and that these students either have an IEP or a 504 plan. And we're in the process of actually tagging these students now in PowerSchool so we could better track their attendance. These are some students that we maybe classify as medically fragile or just having other medical conditions that would impact their attendance. So they make up 1% of our total student population, but they do make up nearly 7% of our special education population. And as we do further work in this area, I feel that it's critical to start to disaggregate some of this special ed data and make sure that we're representing the groups accordingly. One surprise that I uncovered, and I wonder if you would be surprised also, is that our EL students actually, that their attendance has gotten better compared to last year. In national data, EL students are actually more likely to have higher attendance there than their just traditional English speaking counterparts. So even though Hispanic students may experience higher rates of absenteeism, if you are receiving EL services or you are classified as EL, you tend to have better attendance. Now, this is in keeping with national data, and we knew this to be true, which is that students that qualify for free or reduced lunch, or students that experience poverty, have a much higher level of absenteeism. So the most alarming is the overwhelming majority of students that are absent are also dealing with poverty. And dealing with these daily stresses, caring for siblings, high rates of disease, frequent moves to find employment, all contribute to this. And the one thing that we need to think about is the ill effect of this generational poverty and how the efforts have to be more holistically and typically tend to be community-based where they have been effective. This slide will illustrate something similar, which are students in our district that we classify as high needs. also experience a higher rate of absenteeism. Now, I did want to point out that as students get older, their absenteeism increases. Males have higher absenteeism than females. But one thing that we need to make sure that we're paying attention to is that outside of high school age children, kindergartners have the highest absentee rate. So outside of the high schoolers, kindergarten is where the highest absenteeism is occurring. This is a comparison of our schools. And in the other deck, that's much more lengthy, I break it down by school level, but I'll leave it up for you to be able to take a look. I think it's definitely noteworthy that Columbus and Fox Run and Marvin traditionally trend lower than our other schools. So what does this mean for NPS? So the state decreased from 10.7% in 2017-2018 to 10.4 in 2018-2019. Norwalk this year keeps decreasing, so we keep getting closer to our ESSA target of 7.7, but we still have a ways to go. And just keep in mind that this was pre-remote learning data. I'm going to go over our data during distance learning, but we are at 10.3, and at least we're moving in the right direction. But there is still quite a ways to go before we hit our ESSA target of 7.7. The state actually is decreasing at the same rate. These are the points that we were able to earn last year. We were able to earn 39 out of 50 points for all students and 35 out of 50 points for our high need students. So allow me to transition to distance learning. We're going to go over some slides quickly, but I wanted to start off by saying that the McKinney-Vento liaison, which is also me for the district, were made in charge by the state of the attendance and attendance tracking during distance learning. And some of the guidelines that came out for the state, it's that the state will take our attendance prior to the closing of school. And daily attendance at all levels was mandatory during distance learning. Protocols were in place and shared with school leaders. And we had protocols in place for if we saw that a student was out more than 2 consecutive days, we had a protocol in place to connect that student and that family to the respective team at each school. And one of our priorities was making sure that we're assuring the student well-being on a daily basis and just not losing track of children during this remote learning time, making sure that we know where children are and if they are having to move, that we are noting that and making sure that they're still keeping up with their schoolwork as much as possible and staying in touch with their teacher. So this graph is a little up and down, as you could see, but it's the graph that illustrated most poignantly what our data was. The red marks are, the red line is our data during distance learning. And the blue was prior to distance learning. And so you will see that with the elementary schools, for the most part, most schools were able to either maintain or reduce their absenteeism data. We do have a couple of outliers where the absenteeism data actually increased by quite a bit. So in 3 schools, the absenteeism data increased by quite a bit. The same, though, cannot be said for middle school. Our absenteeism data during distance learning actually increased. So we had a lot more students absent across all middle schools. And this same trend is true for our high schools. So what does this look like for us as a district? Pre-distance learning, our attendance data was 10.5%. Post-distance learning, it was 11.5%. We had some schools that did better and some schools that did worse. So in the end, the difference was 1 percentage point. Now, attendance matters more than ever in a distance learning environment. And the reason being is because we don't want to lose track of children, and we want to make sure that we are mitigating learning loss in every way possible. And obviously getting students to participate in plans is critical in order for us to be able to achieve that. So these are just some quotes from Attendance Works, which is a resource that we have utilized quite a bit in the district. As we look to go in between brick and mortar and possible remote learning or having to go to distance learning, we may need to look to policy to create some policy that outlines what are the student responsibilities, the parent responsibilities, teacher responsibilities, and district responsibilities for attendance during this. We have policy for our typical, attendance, but we may need to make sure that we are opening that up and expanding it to include a distance learning environment. So I think that that will be another next step for us. And whether we are in a regular school setting or whether we're in a remote setting, we must just continue to make attendance a priority. So the importance of attendance and the damage that chronic absenteeism does to a child's learning is well documented and researched. It's been connected to higher dropout rates. It's been connected to learning loss and the inability to be on grade level at the grade 3 reading benchmark. So there are many reasons why this continues to be a priority, and we need to leverage the school improvement plans to make sure that we're creating actionable plans to implement the strategies to improve our attendance. We do look to Attendance Work for ideas and for resources, and we've actually been to some workshops that were that were established by the state through Attendance Works. And we need to make sure that we're dedicating resources to improve attendance, funding, time, staff, and gathering data, making data available, and creating transparency or other ways for us to make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable for our attendance and this critical part of our work. Secondly, I wanted to share the Brookside success story, which is a Title I school. And Marvin is also a Title I school that has had a lot of success. But last year, Brookside, not this past academic year, but the year before that, we were actually able to reduce our absenteeism data in half. We were able to go from 12% to 6%. And we really looked to the example set by Fox Run, which was a very systematic way of engaging the staff and teaching the staff and making sure that they're teaching students attendance habits, predicting periods of low attendance, targeting parents, kids, making sure that we have activities that are celebrating good attendance and targeting good attendance, but really making sure that we have a clear and communicated system for tracking attendance and that we have the people dedicated to tracking attendance. And we have actually shared this with school leaders during our school leaders meetings. And we believe that if we make this part of the school improvement plans, then we will continue to see these reductions in our chronic absenteeism data. So if Brookside could do it, then I believe that other schools will be able to do it also. So I will pause now and see if you have any questions.
Does anybody have any questions?
I do.
I do.
Go ahead.
Do you want to go, Barbara, first? Up to you.
No, you go. You go.
You want me to go? Okay. Sandy, thank you. Very comprehensive presentation. So thank you so much for bringing this to light and presenting this and sharing this with the board. Couple of questions and then just a couple brief comments. How are we tracking, or how do we track more than 2 absences? So if a student was absent more than 2 days, how are we tracking that at the building level?
During distance learning,
Yeah, exactly.
the principals were tracking that. This was a protocol that we put in place for principals to have their attendance teams still up and running during distance learning.
Okay.
And it was
Great.
through, for the elementary schools, it was through their classroom teacher. And at the other schools, it was, I think, their second period teacher. So we kept the same person in charge of attendance that we had in charge during the regular school year.
Okay. Because we don't know what's going to happen, you know, whether it's a
No,
hybrid, whether it's
absolutely.
in school, partial, virtual. So I think keeping track on this, and
Mhm.
you know, to me, and I'm sure for everyone, it's critically important whether you're virtual or you're in school attendance and
Mhm.
having that. And I think where we have the outreach, I know that our teachers are working so closely with our students, but just making sure that the message is then to the principal, and that if we need to contact parents, as long as we have that dialogue ongoing, is so important for student learning and student outcome. And I think we need to be even more aware of it as we move towards the fall.
Agreed.
Thank
Mhm.
you.
Thank you. There was another question before Heidi spoke.
Yep, Barbara, go ahead.
Thanks. So first, I want to celebrate how lucky we are to have Robin Bredinger at Fox Run and her doctoral work being focused on absenteeism and helping guide the way from Fox Run, and then we can share that out across the district. So I definitely think the more that we can make that a systemic change for everyone, better off we will be. I'm very interested in these statistics and the underlying causes, and mostly as the liaison to Norwalk Acts, I wonder if we have an articulated plan for how we might reach out to our community partners to address the underlying causes. I don't remember if it was Godfrey or somebody else who recently told me a story about a CT Rise kid where he kept missing the bus, and so then he missed school. And CT Rise bought him a coffee maker, and he never missed the bus again. So, you know, if we can have these conversations with the social worker or the counselor and find out what the underlying root cause is for the absenteeism, whether it's that the bus corner isn't safe and they're missing the bus and they don't have a car in the family. Do we need a van to go around and pick people up who've missed the bus? I mean, let's problem solve, you know, and find and with our partners. I'm not saying that Norwalk Public Schools, as funded through the city of Norwalk, needs to solve these problems for these families, but Norwalk Public Schools should identify the problems and refer them to the appropriate partner through Norwalk Acts so that we can really solve the problem and stop this learning loss from missed days of school. So whatever we as a board can do to make that happen, I'm all in.
Okay. I will keep digging in the data. So there's a lot to uncover, and I will gladly share it with our partners in Norwalk Acts also.
That's great.
Sandra, question around, is there any work being done to look at schools or measuring students' sense of belonging or connectedness and the impact it has on positive attendance? Is there any work we've done around that?
Yeah, so we actually started to triangulate some of the data and really looking at school climate, right? So I think that there should be some correlation between positive school climate and what students are responding as feeling safe and nurtured, and seeing if that data actually matches up with the absenteeism data at the school. So we just administered the Panorama survey, and the surveys that we had in the past allowed for this like neutral response, and around school and safety, we typically fell in this like neutral area for many years. But now this panorama survey actually allows us to dig deeper into those social emotional, not just competencies, but those questions around how safe do you feel? Do you have friends? That sense of belonging, which will then be another data point that we can use to actually triangulate with this data. And also there's other data points I think that can definitely lend us greater perspective on why students are out and how it is that we can make them feel included. Now, I will point out the one thing that I thought that was really remarkable is that we do have schools that have a high needs population that are not having the same high level of chronic absenteeism. So there's a lot to be learned from those schools that do have those children and are able to sort of beat the odds, for lack of better words. So we do have those schools out there, and we can look to them to replicate those practices.
Erica has her hand up, and then I have a question too. Go ahead, Erica. Oh, you muted yourself.
You're muted.
I apologize if I missed this in your
Okay.
voiceover, but did we parse out absenteeism associated with the K-3 children that didn't have devices early on in the remote learning?
No, we didn't. But Dr. Costanzo's next presentation, the one on Panorama, is going to talk about students and their access to with devices. And I think that it'll give you some insight into your question. But we didn't parse out the students that didn't have devices in those lower grades. But again, Erica, there's some students that didn't have devices at certain schools during distance learning that had a really great attendance rate, while others that were in the same predicament had higher levels of absenteeism. So we're noticing that it's not as predictable as we would have thought in our district, because there are schools that are doing remarkably well, even under the same conditions.
So by every school in the K-3, when they were still using packets, every school was reporting attendance electronically.
Yes.
So it's reasonable to assume that there could be a correlation if they didn't have devices that they weren't reporting.
That if they didn't have devices, no, because the teachers were asked to connect with each family on a daily basis through telephone if they couldn't get in touch with the family. So we had several procedures in place to make sure that if the family didn't have an email, to email the teacher, that we had somebody that was reaching out by telephone. And we actually ended up getting help from our paraeducators, our social workers, to make sure that we were making contact. That contact could have been through email or through a phone call on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Yes.
Okay. So I have a question, and I don't know, I'm going to try and get it right because it's sort of amorphous in my mind. But my experience of student absence during this distance learning time was much more human than it was during regular school time. So for example, like hypothetically say my daughter was absent from school. During regular school, we would get the robocall and it would say, your child was absent from period 6, whatever. And during distance learning, teachers were emailing, and it was coming from a place of real kindness and concern if my daughter missed something. And I'm thinking about the moment that we're in, the historical moment that we're in. And I'm thinking about all of the things that we're doing to try to address not only disproportionality of discipline outcomes across the different demographic groups of kids that we serve, but also things that begin and escalate and lead to a child checking out of school or tuning out of school or feeling like school is not for them because they've had these negative experiences that have escalated. And so my question is, or my seed that I'm planting is, as we are moving forward, I know that a lot of policies surrounding absenteeism are dictated to us by the state, but I'm wondering if we could put in our minds an attempt to approach it from sort of like a restorative practice perspective, so that instead of being punitive about absence, that we look for root causes and that we treat it educationally rather than having there be punitive consequences to the child for being absent, insofar as we're able to have wiggle room with policies from the state. So I don't know if that was a big bag of words I just threw at you. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I mean, I think I'll share something that I found really interesting is that I had run the numbers 4 weeks into distance learning. And I had shared that. That was the original time that I had the original presentation that I had shared with Dr. Adamowski. And we hadn't dipped. We had sort of maintained the same attendance rate. So I think that the longer we stayed out, the worse our attendance got. And I think it's sort of, I'm guessing, goes with what you're saying in terms of just people getting more stressed out, families possibly facing having to move or facing other things, I think, that impacted our students. But there is that data that was available that we took in April, towards the end of April, and then we ended up seeing a dip from April till this June 9th.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Okay.
Are you done, Sarah?
I sure am. Go ahead.
So teachers, are they taking attendance at each class that they're teaching, or is it only the once a day? Because I was under the impression that each class would take their own attendance.
The attendance at the elementary school is once a day because it's the same teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at the high schools, it was per teacher.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara, you had another question too?
I did. Thanks so much. I just wanted to go back to the question of absenteeism with medically fragile children, where,
yes,
through no fault of their own,
mm-hmm.
It's difficult to attend regularly. So I know that the model in some alternative schools for medically fragile children is to use Zoom on the days that they cannot attend due to their illness. Is that something that we could consider accessing for the district now that we have proficiency in this modality?
I think that this is something that maybe Yvette and Brenda and Dr. Costanzo can definitely chime in on, in terms of how is it that we make accommodations for those children that might be out because of their condition. But it's something that we should look into. I also want to learn more about that population within our district. I think that up until we started really tracking this attendance, we sort of just looked at it just as students with an IEP, but I think we now need to disaggregate that and really take a good look at it.
I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
When a student goes from a full school day to 2 hours on homebound or missing a week or two of material, there's a lot of learning loss that's involved. And so I think that thinking about the structures and digging into the root cause can really help.
And Sarah, can I just follow up on the questions you were asking earlier about, Sandra, you were saying that as we got further into distance learning, we saw the slight uptick in absenteeism, right? It was not that evident in the first 4 weeks. I'm wondering if, given that, with the prospect of perhaps a context of an extended distance learning situation in the fall, would we want to revise or review our target, the ESSA guideline of 7.7%, given that, that's the context may be drastically different?
Well, the target is set by the state for us.
I
So
see.
so we don't have a lot of say as to what that target is, that they set the target for us. My assumption would be that if we find ourselves sort of in this situation where we're going from brick and mortar to remote that those targets, not just for chronic absenteeism, but for everything else, will have to be reviewed just the same way that everything else is sort of under under scrutiny as to can we actually make those targets and what does that mean for us in terms of the strategies and the protocols that we put in place.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're doing the thing that we often do where for the first presentation, we all have lots
Yes.
of questions and then we have lots more things to get through.
And then everybody else gets the rush. Yes. So with
All right,
that,
well-
I do have the deck available to you. So if you guys wanted to have it, and I could even share the more comprehensive one, it has many more slides. I
Would be great.
gladly make that available.
That would be fantastic. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Thank you guys.
Of
Thank
course.
you,
I'm glad to be
Sandra.
presenting second.
Okay. We're going to move into the NAOP end of year report for the new board members, new members of the board. This is our program for expelled students, and it has developed quite a bit over the last few years. 5 years ago, it was a half-time program. It's a full-time program now, and it had many more students a number of years ago. And as our expulsion rate has gone down, the number of students has decreased. However, this is very important for the students involved because there are a number of infractions under state law that require expulsion, where we are unable to engage any type of restorative discipline practice. And this is designed as a means of the student keeping up with their work so they don't lose a full year of school or a partial year of school. So we have our the students are not allowed on school grounds when they're expelled. So this is always in a community setting. In this case, at the Carver Center, and Frank and our great director Joe Pulick, who will be able to review the data from this past year.
Thank you, Dr. Adamowski. I just want to take a couple of minutes to thank the staff at the Norwalk Alternative Opportunity Program, starting with Joe Pulick, who is the director of the program, serves as the social studies instructional certified person, and also is certified in special education. So he wears multiple hats and has really done an exceptional job since the inception of the program in 2017 and 2018. The staff also includes Beverly McFadden, a retired English and social studies teacher. John Foldiak, a Norwalk High School science teacher, teaches one course at NAOP. And Ron Sabad, Brian McMahon High School math teacher, also a one course that is taught, provided through the Brian McMahon High School staff. And Chelsea Garcia is a full-time paraprofessional who supports Joe on a daily basis inside the classroom. So we have Mr. Pulick here. I think what I'll do, Joe, is I'll share my screen.
Actually, if I could share mine, and then this way I can switch it as a please.
Sure. Are you able to? That would be perfect.
Yeah, I'll do it.
As Joe is going ahead to do this, the state, through statute about 3.5 years ago, required school districts to provide a full day expulsion learning program for any students expelled from public education in Connecticut. Prior to this statute, students who were expelled received 2 hours of instruction on a daily basis. And the state gave local districts 1 school year to come up with a plan to educate their expelled students full time. And so this has been an evolution over the past 2.5 to 3 years here in Norwalk, going from a program where we serve students a couple of hours a day to a full day program that includes breakfast and lunch. We occupy a classroom, thanks to the generosity of the Carver Center, on the 2nd floor at the Carver Center. And as Joe will point out through the slides tonight, the program has done a whole lot of good in keeping kids engaged, getting students to earn their requisite credits toward graduation, and in some cases actually getting them to graduation where they are upperclassmen. But I will give Joe the opportunity to talk about his good work tonight.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to speak today. I hope you can all hear me. I had a meeting earlier and it worked excellent, and then I had problems with my time down here. But we'll see what we can do. As Frank just mentioned, we're required by a state statute to educate all students under the age of, or give them a chance at continuing their academics up until the age of 16. And then any student 16 or 18 that's only been expelled once, we have to allow them that opportunity to be able to continue their education. Can we do that through NAP? Well, let me see, I'm flipping too quick. Okay. Since I started here 3 years ago, it's been my vision and the mission of NAP to create an appropriate learning environment that is both caring and supportive of the students. These students come to me stressed out. They've just gotten handed the heaviest penalty they could receive from a school district, and they come to us. Their parents as well are dealing with this, and we're trying to sort of bring them back into the fold, bring them back into the Norwalk Public School program, and make them feel comfortable while they deal with their accountability. And to do this, we provide them the opportunity to prove themselves both academically, socially, and emotionally. And this is done like we really believe in creating a safe environment, not only physically, just physically safe, but we want to create an emotionally safe environment. Students are told our biggest rule, our main rule is the respect of staff, the respect of students, and the respect of themselves. And throughout the program, as we're working with the kids and they're regaining their credits, as Dr. Costanzo said, is we're asking them to reflect through different events that they do, activities, issues that come up during the day. We ask the students to sit back and reflect. I'm not there to tell them what right and wrong is, but we talk to them about reflecting on what is right and wrong and have them come through discovery, the realization of what they need to do to self-improve. We start the initial learning. They come at different times in the year, they come with different needs. I gotta say, give our attorney Larry Cafaro and Joe Rios a big holding these students accountable. They're giving them expectations that are not only rigorous, but it gives them the opportunity or that light at the end might be able to of their expulsion early, not have to spend an entire 180 days. Allows us to be able to students, motivate them, keep them on track, and help work towards that goal. And we've been successful with many of them in that way. So once I receive the contract from Larry, what I do is we sit down and we review all this. I get to learn the student as an individual on paper. Look at their discipline records. Look at what classes they're taking. Look what classes they're missing. One of the main hopes that I have is not only to keep them on track. So, for example, if a student comes to NAIOP in a second marking period, we're going to put them on track so that they finish by the end of the year. If they're going to be returning back to their school, say in the third marking period, we'll give them the work to get them to that point and
We're having a little trouble hearing you. The audio is breaking up a little. Now you're muted. Oh, we can't. Oh dear. We can't hear you. You're muted. Ralph, can you unmute him? Or does he have to do it?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yep. Now we can hear you.
Hello?
Yep. Yep. Now we got you. You're back. I think the last slide, we didn't hear much of what you said. Just the last slide, though.
I'm losing.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter
Oh, dear.
followed by pound.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you,
All
Joe.
right, you can hear you, but you can hear me. So let me go back to where I was. So we set up an individual learning plan with them. And we set up their core courses that they need. If they're missing and there's time, if they're going to be with me for the full year, we'll set up courses so they can recover. Say a student in their freshman year dropped a few courses. Maybe they failed U.S. history. So we'll give them a U.S. history course and push them to recover it before they return. My biggest hope is that we get these students back on track so they're back in their cohort and they're graduating on time. We also set benchmarks through the Edgenuity program. The students are guided and they can tell how much work needs to be completed so that they can finish on time. Progress reports are sent to parents every week. They get a progress report. I'm in constant contact with parents. I let them know when the student shows up to the program. I let them know when the student leaves the program. The students then, when we sit down with them, we review this program. We ask their input and decide whether there's other courses that need to be picked up or, you know, so I've had a student that through anxiety decided that it was too stressful to see that many courses. So we would hire courses so he would only see 4 of the courses that he's working on. And we try to best meet the needs of each child. As Dr. Costanzo pointed out, I'm the only full-time employee in the program. The rest are part-time. I can't say enough about the teachers that come to us from Brian McMahon and Norwalk High School, as well as, you know, I'm not slighting Ms. McFadden. What I like about the fact that we have shared teachers, it allows us an opportunity that when our students go back, they have someone they can contact that's a friendly face, someone they know. I'm a firm believer in these guys when they go back. It's stressful for them. There needs to be someone they can connect to, one adult. We look at, you know, building positive cultures in schools. It's so important that every student has one adult that they can speak to. When we brought in Chelsea Garcia, it was an excellent opportunity. I think it's really impacted our day. We had a couple of younger students, middle school students that were with us. She was able to connect with them when issues arise. Conflicts between students doesn't happen often, but if it does, if someone's having a bad day, it allows us an opportunity to sort of split up the group. Any kind of special ed services that is needed, as I fulfill the services within the school as a special ed teacher, but if a student has counseling or speech and language, those are provided to us from the school. As Dr. Costanzo said, the Carver Center has been an unbelievable asset for us. Novelette Peterkins, she provided us the opportunity to get 2 classrooms that have a divider in them. It allows us to spread the kids out, less conflict with them, gives them plenty of space to work and not be interrupted or disrupted by other students. The Carver Center has gone out of its way to help every need we've ever come up with. And all provided to the district at no cost. So we're very pleased with them. We've also reached out to the juvenile probation office. I'm in contact with probation officers regularly. They check up on their students.
We work with them. I think one of the things that they're a great asset for is when a student doesn't show up or is not taking the opportunity to come to NAIOP, they've been able to help motivate the student to get them to come back to the program. Juvenile justice, they come by, we provide opportunities for them. They become more this year. We've got to see them a little bit more often. They were able to come in, work with kids. Again, give these kids any kind of support emotionally, I think it's going to help them when they return back to the school. Department of Children and Families, they've reached out from time to time. We've had them, they've actually drove kids to the program that were choosing not to show up. And we work with the advocates and parents at the children and community programs and help the students as best we can. Look at some of the numbers, the overall numbers. As Dr. Adamowski said, the first year we were a 2 hour a day, 4 days a week. We had about 27 students that year. Roughly around 18%, 18 of them would show up regularly. And then we had, so 3 of them returned that year. One of the things we do is we hold the kids accountable to the expectations of their contract. In order to return early, they either have to do one of 2 things. You have to meet those expectations, or their contract isn't a full 180 days. For example, a student might only have to serve until the end of the school year. That could be a month, that could be 2 months. Most times a student is expelled, they get 180 days with the opportunity to return after 2 months. Those kind of students, we try to get back within their 2 months. But if they don't stand up to their contract, we don't send them back. Yeah, and the students all know this, and we talk to them about it, and we review it with them, and review it with parents. There's no misunderstandings. At the end of the day, they know whether they're going back or they're not going back. And again, I really try to encourage them to get back. I think it's more important that they're back in the classroom than staying with us. But we do prepare them for that, and we also work with them as far as building strategies for them, like how not to get involved in some of the situations they found themselves in. So as you see, some of them return back, we returned 24 back early that year. And then we earned about 26 credits overall for the students. The next year was our first year as a full-time program. We had larger numbers, 41 students that year, but we were able to have students work hard enough to earn 56 credits. That's about a credit per student. That became sort of a benchmark for me. And I said, we need to move it up further. And we started shooting for two credits per student. And when we got our numbers this year, and even with leaving in March, our numbers are a lot lower. I'm happy for that. I also am not naive that we were out of school, 5 months. So it's important that we pushed and the kids worked hard. As Dr. Adamowski said, we had several students in this year. We had 4 of them graduate. And I haven't even told Dr. Costanzo this yet, but over the weekend, I had gotten a text message from one of those graduating students who received an acceptance letter to a college, a 4-year college. Had a little hard time keeping the dry eyes out that day, but it's an excellent thing. I also wanted to break down our population, take a look at our numbers as far as who makes up the program. We've got males and females. Roughly, starting in the first year when we had 24 males to 3 females, those numbers are starting to change a little bit. We're starting to see that we're getting 20 to 14 now in this year. One of the numbers that's concerning me, and I highlighted here, is our special ed numbers have gone up substantially to 50%. I also highlighted it because I felt that out of that 50%, 9 of those students were had a primary disability of emotionally disturbed. So that to me was just sort of something I want to take a look at, and maybe we can come up with some strategies on how we want to address that. Our ELL numbers, I mean, when you look at it, I think it's showing it in a percentage wise, 9% of the population, that's about 2 students. But we have. When we look at their ethnicity, the letters stand for Asian is the first percentage, Black and African American, Hispanic, multi-race, and white. It's very obvious that we have a concern here with Black and African American and Hispanic numbers are, to me, high compared to the population of our district. So it might be something we really need to take a look at. And when we look at our lunch status, our free and reduced and paid lunches, our free lunches tend to be the ones that are falling in those numbers. Grade-wise, they're pretty consistent across the board. We've had a 7th grader each year, a couple 8th graders, and then we're pretty much consistent across the board as far as the numbers. So I don't see too much there changing. Point out some of the successes we have. I think the number of students being referred is dropping. I think, like Dr. Adamowski mentioned, there are several incidences or activities that are mandated by state that expulsions takes place, and you're starting to see that many of those are the reason why the students are being expelled. And so when you look at the other events not being referred to expulsion, I have a feeling that that's showing that our PBIS programs are beginning to take effect and working in the schools. We also feel that the credits being earned by students is continuing to rise, and we're going to continue to keep pushing that number. I think as more and more students talk about the program that are there, because the kids all know one another, they're going to start saying, hey, I can go there and earn my credits and get my work done, and we'll start seeing more of them. Discipline issues at NAIOP have declined. I think, like I mentioned before, with the introduction of Chelsea Garcia in the program, having that extra person in the room allows us to split up. We also had the opportunity that when I had an issue with a student or students having an issue, we could separate, take them out into the hallway, have a conversation with them, and then return back without disrupting everybody else and starting other issues within the classroom. Some of the concerns, I think we need to encourage greater participation in the program. When you look at the number of kids that choose to opt not to show up at the program, I think we need to do more work with the community programs that can help get those students back in. We have increased supports. I think one of the things that, I pointed out with the 50% of special ed students in the program, I think we need to take a look at increasing supports for students with disabilities before they're expelled. I think there should be behavior plans and things like that that could take effect that might help alleviate us from having to go to the expulsion route. We need to increase levels of intervention for non-disabled students. I think some students that they're not identified as special ed. They're having trends leading that direction. I think those are showing up in our numbers. And I think we need to strengthen our advisory. One of the things, like I said earlier, I really like taking the opportunity to talk to kids, asking them to reflect on issues, ask them to reflect on their attitudes, and help to guide them so that when they do return back to school, they return back. And we have a saying at NAIOP: we love you dearly, but we don't want you to return. And we hope that by giving them the strategies that they need when they go back, they go back. One of the greatest things, I had a mother say to me, I don't know what you did there, Mr. Pula, but she comes down every night and she helps me do the dishes. And she says to me, I don't want to fight anymore. And that's the kind of thing we try to convince the kids. And it's not me telling them not to fight. It's they finally come to the realization through the reflection process. And we need to work harder on that advisory. element. So what do the programs need? I think we need to build more community support and increase participation with them. We need to explore expanding our advising. One of the things I want to talk to Dr. Anderson. I know he over the COVID outplacement that he was doing some mindfulness. I think that would be a great component that if we could slip that in there, I think some of these kids would be open to it. And we need to work with schools to provide more mentorship. Like I said, it's great to have those teachers that are coming over for math and science being in the programs, because they do. Some of our kids do return and they see Mr. Foliak in the hallway. Say, Mr. Foliak, can I talk to you? I'm having an issue with a kid, but I'm not willing to go to administration, so I want to talk to you. And they talk to them, and we try to work them back and get them back into, getting the help they need. And I know Dr. Costanza wanted to take this part.
Thank you, Joe. Excellent presentation. And if we look at the suggestions for the district, considering that we have 20 or so students in the expelled classroom at any given time throughout the year, there are some things I think we need to be thinking about as a district. One is identifying student struggling with behavior and thinking about how we best implement behavior approaches within the program. If you could go back, Joe, to that slide. We also talked about incorporating a Swiss data chart management system that would give the program some regular data to look at, and the small faculty that's there could actually sit around and talk about data as opposed to individual students. There you are, Joe. We threw in here a child study team. For those of you that are familiar with the Comer model, the SSS teams that work in many of the urban district schools in the state have a SSS team that meets and reviews individual students and how teachers can modify their practices to support positive behavior and improved engagement. Restorative practices training. We've got to help this group of people who engage on a daily basis here with our students who are struggling most with the skills around restorative practices. Joe, we have 6 restorative practices training sessions scheduled for this summer in July and August. And it would make good sense to connect your staff members with those opportunities if there's still some seats available. And then you can see here toward the bottom, setting behavior intervention plans for.
Frank, I can't hear anybody.
Well, we hear you, Joe. Non-disabled students. And like we want to do with the full district, engage this school faculty around equity work and implicit bias training. It was an eye-opener, I'm sure, for some of you to see the expulsion results that we've seen over the past 3 years. They're quite similar to other urban school districts in Connecticut. We see an underrepresentation of our white population. We see a significant population of our African-American students compared to their overall population. And our Latino population, which is closing in on 50%, is actually underrepresented. I think they are expelled at about 38%. And interestingly, and what aligns with the national data, English language learners are only expelled at 9%. Although they make up 20% of our district. That mirrors the national research. English language learners tend to be expelled and disciplined far less. These expulsion numbers, when we talk about demographics, represent our overall discipline incidence in the district. And I think I did this a presentation on discipline in Norwalk at the beginning of this school year, where we talked about the success of reducing our overall discipline incidents by more than 400. but not really closing the gap when we look at our demographic disparities. And so there remains much work to be done. We've been communicating with Yvette and her team about the special education population and the increase in that percentage of the overall expelled student count. And we're happy to answer any questions that you might have tonight.
I actually do have a question, Frank, if nobody is ready to jump in with one. We had the data disaggregated by a bunch of different metrics, but is there a way to notice if there is a pattern? I'm sure there is, where there are certain schools that are doing a better job at having proportional discipline rates relative to their demographic populations, and schools where you're seeing a lot of referrals. Did that make sense, or did I not make sense?
It does. We attempt to meet monthly with school principals at some point during our monthly school principals meeting. One of the items that we often look at in the breakout sessions by grade level or by elementary, middle, and high level is discipline data and attendance data. So we have an opportunity to look at those numbers, and we do demographic breakdowns. We haven't seen outliers one way or the other. This tends to be consistent, and the discipline seems to be consistently applied, and that's not a good thing, because we're continuing to see these disparities in the numbers. We do expect that an expansion of our restorative practices trainings will help. Where we have seen good results are places where it's been embraced the most, like Roten Middle School, where suspension and expulsion rates have pretty much been wiped out. That's to the good work of the administrative team and the teachers there that are really embracing that work, but it's got to expand out into other schools.
For sure. Eric, I see your pencil. If we have, Roten, I think, is a good example of a school that is, in a data-based way, doing a really good job. I'll just say, Erica, before I turn it over for your question, that for me, it's like my main priority that all of the things that we do for all of our students are actually educational and not punitive in whatever way. So whenever there is a disciplinary incident, whenever there is anything that happens, I think this restorative practice framework is 100% where we should be putting as many of our resources as possible. So anyways, Erica, to you.
I'll say this, and I know Yvette will want to chime in on this comment as well. We just got through with an ad hoc SPED presentation on social justice and initiatives and training by the specialized learning department. And one of the alarming stats that came up was that there is a disproportionality in suspension and expulsion and representation of ID students specific to the cross-section of children with special needs that are also identified as Black. We are above the state relative risk index as in the 2017-18 school year. What Stacy and Yvette went on to say, and I'll have Yvette comment on a bit more about this, is the efforts that they have put into place to course correct those numbers. They include some of the things that Frank spoke about implicit bias training and culturally responsive teaching practices. And she also did acknowledge the percentage in terms of our population and the stats that were presented, the 50% number that popped out, that while the absolute numbers are going down for the special ed population, that the percentage is going up. So I just wanted to, one of the things I was going to elevate to the board following that discussion was it should be a conversation that we continue as part of the retreat. And with that, I'll just have Yvette piggyback on anything that I didn't.
So just to, thank you, Erica. Just to clarify, the two areas for self-assessment were two separate areas. One was and both based upon disproportionality of race. One was identification of students as ID as one area. The second area, not related to the classification rate at all, was the number of students with disabilities who are Black and subject to suspensions over 10 days or expulsion, which is exactly the data that Joe and Frank are talking about tonight. Our recommendation is to do a root cause analysis to determine why that nexus exists between children with disabilities, students with disabilities who are Black. I would venture to say that the trifecta is male as well. And you look at the nexus of male Black students with disabilities, and you see nationally, as well as in Norwalk, a disproportionality with regard to discipline, such as what Joe just described. So my recommendation is a root cause analysis of that data.
I think that's a good recommendation. And I would like to say also for any members of the public that might be watching who might not know this, because how would they know, that this is one of Dr. Estrella's areas of expertise, is helping school systems make these changes so that we are not failing our children of color in terms of discipline over identification of any kind of, so I'm happy that she's coming to us to help us with this work. Did anybody else have any questions about anything?
I do have a comment. Oh, go ahead.
No, you guys go first. I'm good.
More so points of clarification. In the presentation, I noticed this reference around the impact that PBIS may have had on decreasing the number of referrals. And I just wanted to be clear around how many reasons for referral, if there was any data point, were outside exclusionary reasons pertaining to breaking school code conduct around carrying a weapon or firearms. I wasn't quite clear on how that was impacted. The decrease in referrals with PBIS.
Who wants to take that one?
Well, I know that both comprehensive high schools began to undergo a 2-year retraining of PBIS. So each high school nominated a team of staff members within each building, and they began a 2-year process of PBIS retraining. This started at around the same time we went full-time for NAOP, because we were seeing the increase in suspensions and expulsions from 15-16 to 16-17 to 17-18. Those teams have had some impact on PBIS procedures and processes in their schools. I don't know how much the PBIS teams have actually led to any decreases in expulsions. Most of our expulsions are a result of one of two things: students who are in possession of drugs with an intent to sell, or in possession of a firearm or a dangerous instrument of some kind, which warrants an automatic expulsion from public schools. We don't have a breakdown here. When we look at the number of expulsions that were heard and determined to be expellable offenses this year, what percentage of those were because of meeting the statutory requirement for an automatic expulsion. But I could certainly get that data from you through Joe Rios and Joe Pewlett if we go back and call the data of the hearings that resulted in expulsion decisions, what number of those were automatic and what number were at the discretion of the hearing officer. In the cases where they're not automatic, there tends to need to be a really comprehensive list of discipline incidents that get more severe over time and lead to significant learning disruptions to different portions of the school building. And it's only when it gets to that point that an expulsion generally gets approved that doesn't involve drug dealing or weapons possession.
And as it relates to transition planning of returning to the district school or school they were at prior to the expulsion, is the only choice to return back to the school you came from in terms of when the end of the 180-day takes place, and looking at, you know, different things that were, I guess, found to be successful while in AOP, you know, is the only option for a student for where they go after only their district school?
That's a very good question. And the general rule of thumb is that the student returns to the school that they were expelled from. But we have had instances where families have requested to sit down and meet with me at central office, sometimes with Mr. Pewlett. And they express an interest for a fresh start, a different environment. And we work with the principal who would be sending the student and the principal that would be receiving this new student. And we try and, you know, create an equitable playing field for the high school principals. But we do like to accommodate families that have a compelling reason to not return to the school where they got into trouble in the first place.
And last question, in terms of the program's budget, is operation happen just through the referring school sites, or is there a specific program budget outline for, like where does it fall under in terms of?
There's a specific line within operations that budgets for the Norwalk Alternative Opportunity Program, so that it's a baseline amount that allows us to fund a full-time director and the part-time teaching staff that you see. We don't have to pay for space, but we do have to pay for supplies. There's technology costs, paper supply, etc. We also like to invite and involve Joe Pewlett in some of the professional development training that occurs during the year. But at this point, it doesn't have its own student-based budget because we can't forecast what the student population would be in any given year. So we have a set foundation amount that puts the key pieces in place for whatever might come that next year.
I really appreciate the presentation, you know, and look forward to just really tackling some of the solutions to address these issues. You know, most struggling group of kids aren't in a place with just a minimum resources, you know, to just set them up for success. Yeah, it's definitely a sticky situation. Thank you for this presentation.
Well, thank you, and thanks again to Joe and his staff. It's a challenging assignment, and they've done a lot of good work over the past couple of years, and you know, hopeful that we can continue to really change the way that students end up in the program, and then once we do have them in, trying to engage more of those families to take advantage of the program when they're expelled and engage in it.
Sherelle, did your question get answered or no?
Sorry, I had muted myself. No, I have a couple of questions. So I guess one of them deals with the overrepresentation of certain groups in these programs. And it's been an issue as far as, I guess I started noticing maybe about 2001, 2002, and it's been going on for quite some time. So I know we're talking about root causes, but I'm hoping at this point we can really, especially with Connecticut being like the state that has the highest achievement gap, I'm really hoping that, and for lack of a better word, that we're not, or phrase rather, that we're not kicking the can down the road, that we can really come up with a solution. And then the other thing is, so are we working with any of the civic organizations within, for lack of a better word, these subgroups?
Frank, you're still muted if you're talking.
Thank you. We are, I think, what we have engaged in more recently with the collaboration of Alicia King and other individuals in City Hall is taking a comprehensive look at our juvenile justice system, how students enter into the system in the first place, and getting the departments to talk to each other. So about 6 months ago, the police department began engaging in these conversations. Myself, Sandra Fayes has been involved in those conversations. And we've had an outside group that has come in and taken a look at our data and gotten us to begin to have the conversation. How can we start to change the demographic pattern that we're seeing in Norwalk, that this group sees in Waterbury and New Haven and in every other urban center in Connecticut? I can forward you the information that this group has begun to work, and the individuals in it. I'm drawing a blank on the group's name, but they've at least created a conversation around what does the data show, what changes in the way that we practice instruction, how the police engage youth in the city, and how are we tracking students once they enter into the system to ensure that it's a one-time thing and doesn't lead to a lifetime of criminal behavior. So I think the silver lining in it is that it takes a village to solve this problem. And it can't be the school system alone, but the school system needs to be at the table with the police, with city leadership, so that we work together on a plan that eliminates this injustice.
So Frank, the
Dr.
reason I
Costanzo,
asked is,
I apologize. The name of the group is Racial Equity and Disparity. I think they go by RED. Is that the group?
That's it. Thank you,
Okay.
Sandra.
thank you. But the reason I ask is just because a lot of times there's solutions that happen, but I guess civic organizations that can represent some of the groups and that have relationships within the neighborhoods are not always at the table. So then we have, and I'm not saying this is the case, this particular case, but then we have people who are working with kids who may not understand. We had an incident where we had two different, issues at a school. One group was called for one incident, but another group felt left out. So I just want to avoid that. And if we're really going to have equity, I think we need to start inviting, whether we get along with people or not, we all have the same goal in mind. We really need to start inviting some of these ethnic subgroups, to the table, people who understand the kids in their neighborhoods. And to another point, I'm just wondering, how do we feel now about not having an alternative school? Do we feel that we need one now, or do we feel that we're fine without having an alternative school where some kids can go and get specific help and wraparound services?
Sherelle, is that a question for the board or for Frank?
It would be for Frank.
So I think first to your point about community involvement, I think that's really critical if we're going to make any inroads. And we welcome that conversation with community leaders throughout Norwalk. They should have a voice in the planning and design for an education system that values and gets results when we think about discipline outcomes and learning outcomes in general. Specific question about an alternative school. I think that today in 2019, 2020, as we move into this next year, that the comprehensive high schools have changed so significantly over the past 5 to 7 years in that in a lot of ways operate more focused ways with pathways and smaller schools. I think that helps to set up a process where more students become engaged in a particular area of interest and focus. I also think that students who are struggling in the comprehensive high school have a better structure around them than they did prior to these changes that we've made at the high school. I think there are more individual adults that know individual students better than they may have 5 to 7 to 10 years ago. And I think that goes a long way in connecting students who might be struggling. I also think that when you have an alternative school outside of all of the offerings that a comprehensive school provide, that those students ultimately lose out on the opportunity to benefit from an expansive, comprehensive program of study where they get to interact with many different students and many different content areas that might spark their interest or engage them. It's my belief that if a student is struggling, we want to certainly have a unique education plan for them in place at their school, but that we want the school to offer as many different possible avenues for learning as possible. And I think sometimes we lose out on that when we have a smaller alternative school as an option.
Right. And I didn't necessarily mean that the alternative school had to be outside of a school, but I just think we need a plan in place. And I won't prolong it, but at some point I'd be very curious if we've tracked what happened to the children at Briggs, like where they are now, how they're doing, are they still in school? Did they drop out? So that's sort of where I'm going. I'm just really concerned about the children who may not have, the help or encouragement at home. And sometimes it's, those specialized teachers or specialized principals that know the neighborhood, know the civic organizations that can help. So I don't want you to think that I meant that that the alternative school had to be outside of, the school, just like we thought, like we have pathways and we have all these wonderful schools now. Maybe we could have something like that in the school that works.
That makes good sense. And each high school does have a small operating plan, a small space in either school where students who are falling behind in credits can get back on track through a credit recovery specific model. I think our goal is to continue that until we have a better model in place.
Barbara, I see
That
your...
sounds great. We're thinking of models, so that's great. Thank you.
Barbara, if I can just pop in to just say something really quickly before you ask your question. When you were saying, it's all, you at the beginning of your question, you were talking about root cause analysis. And I think at this point, as a board and a meeting full of people, we can all just agree that the root cause analysis is that America has developed like racist systems and structures that negatively impact Black and brown kids. Like, I don't think we need to do that much more root cause analysis. And I also want to say that I feel like it's very important to me that we solve this problem more quickly than we have. I think in the past 3 weeks, we have seen a lot of really focused change happen very quickly. And so that to me means that it's possible it's possible to say, okay, we have these disproportionate impacts. We have these negative impacts, particularly on, as Yvette was saying, young Black boys with disabilities or without. And I think we can do this faster. That's all I want to say.
I'm hoping so, because I cringe every time I hear that, and I've been hearing it for years. So I cringe because it's a community. I work with all kinds of kids. I am Black, so I sort of cringe, and I'm very happy to hear you say that, because I don't want to hear us kicking the can down the road, and then here we are another 20 years. Oh, we're going to study the root cause. So I really appreciate those words.
Yeah, I think we know what the root cause is. Barbara, what is your question?
That was the perfect lead-in, because I wanted to draw attention to the places where we're having some success. I want to request that we get some reflection upon the difference between what's happening at Brian McMahon and Norwalk High, and whether CT Rise is affecting that, but also just to that same question of urgency. A year in a child's life is a very long time, so we can't waste time going from, okay, we know what the root cause is, to what is our action plan and what are the tangibles. So what are the tangibles that are coming out of Roten, for instance, where LaShonte James has had great success in this area? And how can we spread that success faster? What are the tangibles? What do you need? We gave you, only 15,000 for restorative justice training over the summer. Do you need more resources to accelerate that? And if so, I think the board would be supportive of that. And I think about the success program at Brian McMahon, and the opportunity that affords us. And I think it's also at Norwalk High. I apologize, it's at both. The opportunity that affords us with these children who are diagnosed with special education needs, who are being expelled, it seems that we could move them into this program earlier, intervene, and have fewer customers for Joe, which would make me very, very happy. So I agree with Sherelle. We don't have a minute to waste. And I know that there's been a lot of work to get us where we are today, but we have to have a tangible list of what's next. And it needs to include using what we have in the district as best practices, and the leaders we have who can help us push faster.
For sure. Barbara, that was a good
There
summary.
was a question in there regarding whether
more resources need to be directed.
Is CT Rise affecting outcomes? Are we seeing fewer from Brian McMahon than Norwalk High? And if so, would we want to spread more of the CT Rise tools more quickly?
My understanding is that the CT Rise focus at Brian McMahon has been relegated to the 9th grade cohort. I haven't disaggregated that data. I certainly will. I'd be curious to see what the 9th grade discipline data looks like at Brian McMahon compared to its previous 9th grade data history. We could also look across town and see what the 9th grade data looks like at Norwalk High School, just to get a sense of whether a Connecticut Rise implementation is having any effect on discipline outcomes. So I don't have the answer.
That would be awesome.
I'd be interested to know that.
Thanks.
We had a presentation during the curriculum meeting, I think maybe 2 curriculum meetings ago, and the energy of Connecticut Rise or CT Rise is awesome. But I would like to see, outcomes. I would be curious to know what happened to the BRIC students, what's going on in these smaller areas of each of the high schools, and the fact that we will be we'll have an open mind to maybe creating a new model if we find that this particular model isn't working. So thank you.
If nobody else has any more questions for Frank and Joe, I think that we actually should keep ourselves moving forward, because it's 9 o'clock and we have a bunch of stuff left to do. Is that okay with everybody? Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay, Frank, I know.
Madam Chair, we'll move right along then. And I want to remind the board that this next presentation was actually board inspired. You recall about a month ago, you had an extensive conversation about this with a number of board members being very much in favor of doing a COVID-19 survey. And being motivated by that, we found a company that enabled this to be done without charge. This is a Panorama Group that we do our school climate survey with. They donated this, and we have some very compelling results. So I'm going to ask Frank if he would, as briefly as possible, present the results from the COVID-19 survey.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Ray. And I will do my best to get through this as quickly as possible. A big thank you to Diane Falardo and Sandra Fayways for coordinating the work around this survey. And getting right into it here, we were super impressed given the short window for people to complete the survey, that we had over 1,100 teachers complete the survey, more than 4,000 families, and 4,800 students take the time to complete this survey during the COVID-19 pandemic. You can see the percentages below. Students that completed the survey, 59%, about 77% of teachers, and 40% of families. The focuses for this survey were twofold for students. We wanted to get a sense of student well-being during this distance learning period. And we also wanted to find out from student respondents what their experiences have been like with distance learning. Within each of these two categories, the vendor helped us to measure the negative feelings and the positive feelings around well-being, and I'll provide some examples of that in just a minute. And in particular with the distance learning experiences, we looked at students' daily habits, what needs they had with distance learning, what their environment was like around distance learning, and then the social support. Teacher and staff were responding to these areas. Generally, the perceptions of distance learning environment, professional needs, staff collaboration, student support, family communication, staff well-being, and SEL. And the family topics, and I have to share this with Lamont Daniels, we were pleasantly surprised that families didn't, at least the families that completed the survey, did not exhibit the level of food insecurity that we had predicted that they would. We were happy to see that. Although this is a sample and we don't have 100% of people responding to it, but you can see here the areas that were measured with community responses. So on the students' well-being, this is a snapshot of the positive feelings. It was a 5-part answer prompt. Almost, once in a while, and sometimes would get categorized into non-positive. And then if the respondent answered frequently or almost always to the question, they got categorized into the positive feelings category. In grades 4 and 5, 69% of Norwalk Public School students who completed the survey answered in the positive. And in grades 6 through 12, that number was 61%. And you can see a breakdown by grade level. For the most part, you see a downward trend from grade 6 down to grade 12. The lowest positive feeling percentage was grade 11 at 56%. And then a little bit more specifically, we looked at 3 different areas. There was a question asked about happiness, safety, and helpfulness, and you can see the percentages of students that answered positively in grades 4 to 5 60, 65, and 91%. And then a similar sort of increase when we look at happy, safe, and helpful for grades 6 through 12. So the simple story on this is that when students were asked about the help that they were getting during this period of time, 91% of grade 4 and 5 students were answering positively, 86% of students in grade 6 to 12 were. Positive responses to negative feelings here is what you're looking at. So in grades 4 to 5, 60% of students responded positively, and positively meaning they were answering almost never or once in a while to questions about, you can see here, whether or not they were feeling mad or bored or lonely or sad. And so what we found was that the majority, in most cases, of responses answered almost never or once in a while to them being mad, bored, lonely, or sad with respect to the distance learning experience this year. You can see in grades 6 through 12, 45% of students answered with positive responses. That's down a little bit from our grade 4 to 5 students. And you can see the female and male breakdown respectively. The female percentage, the lowest among 6-12, the lowest of the 4 categories measured, 39% of female students in grade 6 to 12 positively responding to those categories. Students, distance learning environment, overall positive responses here were 63% in grades 4 to 5, grades 6 through 12, 57%. How often are you able to access your online schoolwork? The specific question, 92% of students answering favorably across the grades 4 through 12. So that's really certainly a highlight of this survey, and kudos to IT and the work of Ralph Valenzizi, providing families with access to the internet and electronic devices was certainly a highlight of this survey and something that we should be proud of as a district, including continuing to expand into the areas of our population that were still without electronic devices. Take a look here at community needs, and you can see the number of respondents at each level of the school system. The greatest number of respondents were at the elementary level, the smallest number obviously at the pre-K level, and the percent positive, you can see pretty tight range there between 72 and 78%, with the overall positive response rate at 75%. And again, 4,100 and some odd students completed the survey. I'm sorry, the community needs by school level student responses. 75% favorability for community needs here. Question, does your child have reliable access to a laptop or computer? 95% answering positively or in the affirmative. What best describes your child's internet access? This is interesting, 68% here. 93% comprising the 2 positive responses down at the bottom of the grid. My child has reliable internet access, but it is slow. My child has reliable access to high-speed internet. 25% of respondents answered that their internet access was slow, and 68% provided the most positive possible response answer to that question. Another community needs question here, and 75% favorable responses. How concerned are you about your child's social or emotional well-being? If you look at the right portion of the screen, you'll see that not at all concerned and slightly concerned total 64%. So a positive or favorable response there. Still 37% answered that question as it being that they were somewhat concerned, quite concerned, or extremely concerned about the social or emotional well-being of their child. So while that number is a strong number, 64%, we can say that better than a third of respondents answered that they were at least somewhat concerned about social or emotional well-being. And then the second question, how concerned are you about your child's learning while school is closed? 47% answered not at all or slightly concerned. Percentages for somewhat, quite, or extremely concerned ranged. There was 24%, 17, and then 12%. So that question response was a positive, but not quite as positive as the first instance, social or emotional well-being. Teachers' well-being and perceptions of distance learning. Staff well-being and social emotional learning, 58% favorable overall. Two questions that we pulled here from the survey. How concerned are you about supporting people in your life? Children, other family members, friends, loved ones? Do you have someone at your school or another educator outside your school who you can count on to help you no matter what? Now, I think these questions are aligned with the vision of Javier Padilla and the talent office, that it has to be more than just recruiting good people into the organization, but it's also about supporting and understanding everything that goes on in an employee's life, and how we need to acknowledge that and support that wherever possible. You can see the responses here to these questions, and they're overall favorable, but clearly there was quite a bit of stress going on in the lives of staff members, both professionally and personally, as you can see here in the response data. That data, by the way, mirrored the culture of schools prior to COVID-19. Student engagement in distance learning, according to staff. How many of your students consistently participate in distance learning? Positively answered 68% of the time. And in the past week, how many students have you communicated with? 70%. So I think that does say something about the good work that curriculum and specialized learning has done in a very, very short turnaround time. We had a day or so to work with staff. They went out. They developed remote learning plans in phases and learned as they went along, and did the best they could to engage their students throughout the duration of the pandemic. And you can see that the staff's favorable responses on these two questions is commendable. And so, this data will be important to look at when the reopening task force begins to chart its course for reopening in the fall. We don't really know what the future holds in terms of a pandemic resurgence. There have been some experts that have predicted that there could be a spike or a surge in the Thanksgiving time period or thereafter. And I think we've learned a lot of lessons from the remote learning experience that we've been on together with teachers and administrators and students and families. And this data will come in handy when we look to see areas that we can improve upon, and also things that we should continue to do that we've done that have worked out well for our students and our staff. So I will end there and do my best to answer any questions that you might have at this time.
Sarah, can I ask a question if you don't mind?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, great. Frank, thank you so much for this really comprehensive analysis on the survey, but I just have a couple of quick questions, Frank, and just some comments. Sure. Do you have an idea actually how many families participated in this survey? Do we know?
We do.
Okay, unless I missed that, I just wasn't sure.
4,181 families responded,
okay.
And that's about 40% of our total family population.
Okay, about 40%?
Correct. our vendor tells us that if we can break 30%, that the data is fairly reliable.
Okay, thank you. And it's impressive that 92% online, they were able to access and get on. So that was good, because I know that there were some challenges in the beginning. But a couple of thoughts though, I know, it took a while, K through third, we had just paper packets for quite some time. And I would be interested to know at some point, there was a slide because families didn't have access to online learning, and there were just paper packets, tons and tons of paper packets that were sent out where upper grades were able to have access to this technology. So I'm thrilled that we're able to have this, and thankful to the mayor that we have tablets for our youngest learners, K through third. But at the same time, I'm concerned about the slide that happened in between that time. So, moving forward, if we need to go back to this, at least we know all of our students will have access to online learning, which I think is so incredibly important, and having that dialogue with their teachers on a daily basis, as well as having dialogue with fellow students as well.
Well, Heidi, I'm
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, keep going. Go ahead, Frank.
I was just going to say that that's a good point, and the respondent pool included students in fourth grade and up. Students below fourth grade did not complete the survey. I have Sandra Feoes on the line here. I want to say that families throughout the system were part of the pool. Is that correct, Sandra?
Yeah, that's correct. So all families any family could take the survey. So families of younger children and families of our older children. So even those families that were receiving the paper packets had the opportunity to take the survey, but the students that reported were from grades 4 and up.
Okay.
Thank you. So that population is baked into the numbers, which is good to know. But at any rate, Heidi, did you have an additional question?
Yeah, and then also it's, I'm thrilled to know that staff was also able to participate obviously in this, and it really does take a village, right? And they acknowledged some of the strengths and weaknesses and things that happened along the way, but the staff was just so critically important to the success of online and virtual learning. So, and I also think the social emotional learning component of this as we move forward will be so important with our work with our students and our staff, and having that in place. And I think lastly, Frank, I'd like to add, I'm so happy that we're able to get this survey out, but I think moving forward, we want to continue to do this because we don't know what the fall would look like, even if we're back in school and it's an in-school environment. We still want to know how families are doing during that time, and if we have to have a hybrid model as well. But I think we want to continue the access, continue the dialogue, continue having these surveys, whether it's on a 6-month basis or whatever it is. I think it's just very telling, and it's important for us as a board and community to hear voices on how things are going, and whether we have to tweak it, change it, improve upon it. But we'll only know that we'll know that if we're able to get this type of data and these results back.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was it for me for now.
Okay.
I just tag on.
Yeah.
I just wanted to build on what Heidi said. So I think when the board asked for a survey in April, we were hoping for a survey that happened very quickly in April, and then we adjusted for the next phase. And if we do have to close down, I wonder if we could do something a little more faster. So, sometimes if you go to a training or a convening, they'll do a live poll. So, maybe we could have a town hall a week before we move into another phase if we are in shutdown, in which we do, people can call in, we do live poll and see where the problem areas might be in a faster way, so that we can change course if it's needed in real time or as close to it as possible.
That strategy could be particularly helpful if the reopening guidelines in the fall indicate that we need to operate say at 50% in person. So in the early days and weeks of school, we could do some polling to find out what the remote learning and the in-person learning experience, how that's going for students when we start the new school year.
When we talk about response rates, some of that is training, right? So if you train someone that by responding, something changes for the better, they're more likely to respond. So if we create a structure in which we kind of have a positive feedback loop, I think it would help the whole community get through a crisis like this.
For sure. And I think Dr. Estrella will be an important part of how that conversation shakes out as well. Does anybody else have any other questions for Frank about this stuff?
Just a quick question. Do we know if any other like neighboring districts did something similar in terms of surveys?
I don't know if there were any districts around us. I want to say Bridgeport. Sandra has been more closely involved with the vendor correspondence. Sandra, do you know of other Connecticut districts that implemented a COVID-19 survey?
There are, I just don't know them off the top of my head, but I can definitely just send somebody an email, Colin, and have Dr. Costanzo communicate that with you.
Thank you.
I could do that.
And then I love, Heidi and Barbara's points about, kind of making these as immediately actionable as possible. In this particular case, were any of the, some of the answers had really strong favorable results, but even with like 90%, there were some respondents saying, never or almost never. Were the responses individualized enough that we could follow up with specific families to do any sort of follow-up actions with those families? No.
So the family surveys, the community surveys were anonymous.
Okay.
The student surveys, you could trace back to the student because they have to use a unique login. So we actually can drill down on student survey data, and the staff surveys are anonymous also. So the family surveys, the purposes are is just to give us sort of a general scope of what families are dealing with and how we could best react to them, but it doesn't allow us to actually identify individual families for privacy concerns.
Yeah, great. I mean, I that makes sense. And I just wonder, for the student ones, I wonder if it makes sense to just even do like a spot check, not to say you have to do for, every student, but if you have some students, you have 10 students on one particular question who were like, no, this is not working. It might make sense to do a spot check and say, hey, can we talk more about what's not working here?
Absolutely. And we are going to administer, we're actually going to be in talks with Panorama, administer a fall survey because the spring survey from this year was interrupted.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
The question I had was, when looking at creating the survey questions, did we include our community partners in terms of looking to target questions that would drive action?
I believe that the survey questions are a question bank that the vendor has already developed. And they have a pretty sophisticated process for coming up with those question types. And then they work with district leaders, in our case, Diane and Sandra, and went through the various questions and narrowed the questions down to a survey that we thought would give us the most bang for our buck. Ask these particular questions, get this type of feedback as quickly as possible, so that could help to inform any future remote learning experiences for students and staff and families.
That's correct.
And in the sense of being able to share this, is there anything that our community partners or individuals outside the school is acting on from the responses from this survey, or
The plan is to actually share this with the board and now bring it to the wider community. I think Dr. Costanzo is actually arranging for that, for us to be able to share with the city. And I think Norwalk Acts were one of our partners that were particularly interested in having this survey data. So that was the plan, is to actually be able to share this data.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Starts to, but I'm, pretty sure once we get into the thick of things with the task force, there may be more relevant and contextual questions at the time.
Okay.
I just, looking from perspective of how we're mobilizing everyone and responding to any surprising information or needs that we didn't think were there before the survey was completed, was kind of where my question was coming from.
Okay. If nobody has any more questions, we also still have the enrollment report to go through before we go to our calendar of action items. So shall we move on to that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So do you want the enrollment report?
Yeah, I think
okay.
For sure.
Okay, so very briefly, you've received this. I'm just going to within 2 minutes hit the highlights of it. This is our enrollment report on the last day of school, June 9th, 2020. It shows a total enrollment of 11,910, and that has been stable, mostly stable since the school closure on March 16th. That number is predicted to grow next year, and we should be, the district should be in the 12,000, 12,100 range, predictably at school opening, whether the opening is in person or some of it is remote. You will notice that our largest cohorts are now in grade 6 through 10. 9th is the largest. 3rd is the smallest. However, kindergarten is growing again, and next year's kindergarten will be even larger. So we see, as predicted in our enrollment projections, a school district that will continue to grow as to parallel the city's growth. Now, none of these, this current enrollment and our projections do not build in any further immigration. There was virtually no immigration between March and June, and nationally, immigration is at its absolute lowest during the COVID-19 period. So it is possible that these projections will go higher were immigration to resume. You'll see a sheet on special education that shows the district at 15%. That's up slightly over the beginning of the school year. In terms of EL of lunch status, we are at an all-time high of 60%. And you'll notice further in your agenda the addition of some more universal feeding schools as a result of this. In terms of ethnicity, our 3 largest groups are from smallest to largest: Blacks at 15%, whites at 25%, and Hispanics at 52%. And again, that has been comparable to the beginning of the year and what we saw last year. So, fairly predictable enrollment at this point as we go into the next year. I think we would anticipate that kind of stability until, the COVID-19 is truly over and there's a vaccine and we're back to normal. And then we'll see what happens then. I think that the new schools are coming in the nick of time. I'm hoping that the last really acute enrollment issue will be solved soon by a school in South Norwalk. But I think that, it takes so long to build a school building. All that work of 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago is starting to pay dividends. And you'll see the first evidence of that as Jefferson moves into the lower school at Ponus, and its building is able to be renovated. So of the 900 seats we need, 450 will be manifest a year from now. That's it. Thank you for your patience during a very long, extended report. I want to thank everyone who contributed to it, and Frank, particularly you, for doing the lion's share of this work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The last superintendent's report by Dr. Adamowski. Okay, let's move forward to our actions. So may I please have a motion to approve the consent calendar? Motion by Barbara, seconded by Erica. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor?
If I could say one thing, I just wanted to commend Javier Padilla and our talent office for the incredible, successful effort of recruiting that led to filling this number of positions this early, and particularly those math positions, which are an area of shortage. This is what we would expect from an effective talent office, and I think it's, we've just gotten to the point where this is possible in our schools.
Does anybody else have any discussion about this? Okay, all in favor? Aye.
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 5, 6. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Wait, Sherelle's box lit up.
Sherelle, did
But
you
I'm
say?
okay.
You said
No,
aye.
I don't have anything. I'm okay.
Okay. Okay, so that's 8 in favor, and then Mike Barbas is not here. Okay, item number 3, we have the approval of the fiscal year 2020-2021 final operating budget. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Barbara, may I have a second? Godfrey, any discussion? I think we've done a lot of the discussion already.
This is the most we've ever discussed a budget ever, and it's great that we really know what's in it and the community knows what's in it. And I think the fact that there's nobody here for public comment is a testament to that. Everybody knows what they asked for, what they got, and why. And that feels good.
And I think we're in a really good place. We're in a really good place, surprisingly, given the circumstances in the entire world. I think that I'm happy to be where we are, and I'm very thankful to the city for working with us. And I think this is really good.
That was what I was going to say next, is that we need to be thankful to the mayor, the Common Council, the Board of Estimate and Taxation for understanding that our growing enrollment is still happening despite a global pandemic as well. So we were able to meet our enrollment needs and achieve as many goals as we could from our strategic operating plan. And I'm very pleased that we were also able to continue to support the ELL programming, the robust SPED rollout of programs, and the wellness initiatives, especially around SEL and lunch practice. So thank you to everybody who worked hard, Kristen and Tom and Nina. Thank you for getting that right.
Absolutely. Okay.
I would just add, Sarah, I'm sorry, just real quick. This is something that Tom and Kristen said last week in our meeting. I think this was an example of school-based budgeting done really, really well. So, in addition to thanking all those people, like all the SGC leaders and all the school leaders who put in hours of time and effort to make sure that we got every single penny right, I'm really grateful. It was a very, I think, as collaborative a process as it could have been.
For sure. I would like to echo the thanks to Tom and Kristen and the finance department. And thank you to the finance committee for taking everything so seriously and doing such diligent work about all of this. And thank you to the mayor and the council and the BET. Any more discussion? Okay, all in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? I'm just trying to do everything correctly. You know, I always want correctly. Okay, so the motion passes. Now we have number 4, approval of emergency closure remote learning policy 6172.6. May I have a motion? Heidi, may I have a second? Any discussion about this one?
I'll just, if you don't mind, we went into really lengthy detail, a lot of discussion during our first read, during our last meeting, but I don't want to belabor this and continue on, but it's, as we know, a critically important policy. We went into great detail. We had a Q&A with Dr. Myers, Dr. Costanzo, Yvette, and the policy committee. We had many, many meetings on this because we knew how critically important time was of essence to make sure that we got it right. We also had legal advice from Tom Moody, who's our attorney from Shipman and Goodwin. As we moved through this policy through meetings and lots of discussion, it was really a cohesive effort with everyone involved. We looked at sustainability, access, and equity. That was really very, very important for us as we moved this policy through. I don't know if, and I know we had a lot of questions and discussion during our first read. Frank, I don't know if you want to add anything more, if you want to chime in, if there's anything else that I'm missing on this. But I just wanted to quickly, before you do that, Frank, just to elaborate that the time we spent on this, but in addition to that, we looked at other policies. We wanted to make sure we did our due diligence. So we looked at Canton, Portland, New Canaan was the first very brief policy that we looked at. And we also looked at a sample K policy as well. Frank, did you want to chime in at all if there's anything that I might be missing?
No, Heidi, I think you've covered it. It was a comprehensive effort, and we've got a solid policy in place that will help guide us should we be in this situation again at some point in the future.
And I also think we, as it was mentioned in some of our other presentations today, we might have to continue to tweak this as time goes along. Things may change, it's evolving, and we just don't know what the future will hold. So as a policy committee, we will make sure that we look at this further. It's not stopping now. We will continuously look at this policy.
And thank you so much, Policy Committee, and Heidi as Chair of Policy Committee for doing such thorough work on this. I think it's been very important, and I'm really happy that you worked on it so thoroughly and effectively. Is there any other discussion about this? Okay. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any abstentions? I mean, any no? Sorry. Okay. I think the motion passes unanimously. All righty. And now we have item 5, approval to extend the food services management company contract with Chartwells for fiscal year 2020-2021. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Barbara, second. Heidi, any discussion? I think we're good here.
Chartwells has been amazing.
They've been great. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Chartwells. Delicious, yummy things. My children eat school lunch now, or they did before we closed. And actually, thank you very much to Chartwells for working with us to help feed people who have had significant need in our community during this closure that we've had. I've been heartened by that every day. And thank you, Frank, for spearheading that. Okay, item 6, approval to extend the security guard contract with Century Protective Services July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2023. So I think we need a motion
to discuss.
I think we need to motion, and then I think we need a motion to amend from the floor. Is that right?
Yep. So moved.
Okay.
Second.
So Barbara, would you like to make the motion to amend from the floor?
Yes, I'd like to amend this to a 1-year extension rather than a 3-year contract, so that this board has the opportunity to review our labor practices and decide if this is how we want to move forward.
Okay.
Do we have a second?
I think Colin seconded, right?
I'll second that. Yeah.
Okay.
I think he has to second my move to amend.
Okay, Erica also offered to, so either way. So do we need to, what do we need to do now, given that that is what we would like to do?
So I
Assuming
think
that is
we
what we'd
make
like
the
to do.
motion.
Is there
Do
any
we
more?
make the most amended motion? I believe.
Okay. So then,
So I'd like to move to approve the contract as amended for a 1-year extension.
okay, I'll second. And do we need to have any further discussion about it?
No, I just think it's the right thing to do so that we can vet the process basically. And as Barbara said, you know, look at our labor practices. So Barbara, thank you for that.
Of course. I think it actually opened a whole discussion that was much needed and will lead to some good discussion, and hopefully our stakeholders will be pleased with the outcome. I think we need to engage the community in this conversation of what our priorities are.
Sure. Okay. So all in favor of passing the motion as amended? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes unanimously as amended to extend the contract for 1 year. Okay, now we will go to item 7, which is approval to revise the authorized signers of the ED 099 agreement for child nutrition programs. Motion? I can only see 5 of you. I apologize.
So
Colin, any second? Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. Now we have number 8, approval to apply for community eligibility provision for the following schools, beginning with the 2020-21 school year: Brookside, Jefferson, Marvin, and Silvermine Elementary, and Ponus and West Rocks Middle Schools. And for anybody who doesn't know, that's free lunch for the entire building of children, which is wonderful. May I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
Motion Terrell, second Erica. I got to spread it around so we all get to do some things. Any discussion?
I did have a question. Frank, did we get follow-up information or Tom on whether add-ons in the middle schools were possible when we go to CEP?
Add-ons, you mean like chips?
Yeah, so, you know,
Yeah, I think you mean a la carte items.
Right.
Yeah.
I have not, we have met with Kevin since. I don't recall that discussion happening. I don't know if Tom is on this call or not. Tom, were you able to ask Kevin that question?
I did not specifically ask him that, but my understanding is that a la carte is still available, but the issue is with people on, it's not available under CEP in the sense that a student who wanted a la carte would have to pay extra for it, so that you're going to have less a la carte sales, I think was the issue. But I think it's still available as an option to a student who wants it.
Good. I just want to make sure that we don't have the community coming back to us and saying, my child can't buy an ice cream. This is horrible. You know, obviously it's amazing that we can provide free lunch to children who need it, and that everybody gets the same free lunch, which negates the lunch shaming issue. And I know that the community may have feelings about being able to have the add-on. So if we could confirm that when you have a moment.
Yeah, I think the issue is really from a financial standpoint. The expectation when you're CEP is you're going to have less a la carte sales, and it will have a financial impact. Now, given the fact that we, think we're going to be in a quite different environment next year anyway, in terms of lunch and ability to, for students to be in cafeterias and so forth, that seems to really be a non-issue for us for this coming school year anyway.
For sure. I'm glad you asked the question anyway, though, Barbara. Okay. Is there any more discussion about this agenda item? Okay. All in favor? Thank you, Tom, for the answer. Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, got a little punchy. Okay, now we are on number 9, approval of the contract with Enterprise Management Services, Division of Canon Solutions America Incorporated, to provide mailroom and mail delivery services to the Norwalk Public Schools, July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2022. May I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Second.
Second, Erica and Cheryl. Any discussion about this one? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any abstentions? The motion passes unanimously. This is very exciting. Okay. Now we have number 10, which is to authorize the superintendent to approve fiscal year 2019-2020 year-end budget transfers in excess of $10,000, subject to providing the board with notification of all such transfers. Motion, please.
So moved.
No, Diana gets to do it.
Oh, good.
Second, Erica. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okie dokie, we got through our things that we had to approve. Okay, now we are going to move on to Roman numeral 6, information and reports, and we are going to start with letter A, which is recognition of LGBTQ plus Pride Month, June 2020, and I have a statement to read that I'm going to edit on the fly a little bit. The Norwalk Board of Education and Norwalk Public Schools are pleased to recognize, and I would amend that to say delighted to recognize, June as LGBTQ plus Pride Month by proclaiming June as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer Pride Month. The Board of Education welcomes and supports all students, staff, and families, inclusive of all gender identities, expressions, and sexual orientations. The Board of Education and Norwalk Public Schools administrators, educators, and staff are committed to providing a safe, respectful, and inclusive learning environment for all. We know that encouraging greater acceptance and support for all youth and all members of our community, including LGBTQ+, or those who are perceived to be LGBTQ+, will make communities stronger, safer, better places for everyone. This June marks the 50th anniversary of annual Pride traditions across the country. Pride Month is celebrated each year to coincide with the events of June 1969, when patrons and supporters of the Stonewall Inn in New York City resisted the persecution to which LGBTQ+ Americans were commonly subjected and continue to be subjected. This moment in history is regarded as the beginning of a movement to outlaw discriminatory laws and practices against LGBTQ+ Americans. And the statement goes on to say that typically there are parades and events and workshops that we are not able to participate in now because of the social distancing that we are all going through as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, but that there are many online observances available to people. And I would also like to take a second to express my delight with the Supreme Court decision saying that the rights of LGBTQ+ Americans at work are protected under existing civil rights laws, as they should be. So that is our statement about that. And I lost my next agenda item on the phone. Oh, okay, now we have the May 2020 financial reports from Tom or Kristen or whomever is still with us in this Zoom call.
Sure, I will give you a brief report here. We're obviously coming up on the end of the school or end of the fiscal year. The school year obviously is over. We're at the May financial report, which is in your packet. We are 91.6% of the way through the fiscal year at that point. We have spent about 78% of the budget. And we do expect some savings in some areas as a result of the shutdown and the distance learning environment that we've been in. We also have some areas where we've experienced some higher than anticipated costs. And we've shared those numbers and those projections pretty extensively with the Finance Committee over the last couple of months. Just to hit some of the highlights, we do have some savings in some areas like daily substitutes and certified hourly wages and extracurricular stipends. We do have also some turn back in some of the other wage accounts due to normal attrition effects. In terms of our benefit accounts, we're expecting a small turn back in the retirement severance account based on the number of people who are retiring this June. And there is some savings in the unemployment account as well. In the 300 series of accounts, which are professional and technical services, we have some savings in the attendance at meetings category, field trips, legal fees, and other professional services. And in the 500 series, which is other services, we have some small savings in transportation and also some savings in special education tuition. The 600 series of accounts have some savings in some of the supply accounts, as well as some of the utility accounts, electricity, oil, and natural gas. Although we have some overage in and some accounts that we've transferred money into in postage and printing, which was needed for learning packets. The 700 and 800 series of accounts are running pretty much on budget. Again, we've shared the projection with the Finance Committee at the last Finance Committee meeting, and we do anticipate we will have the necessary surplus at the end of the year to carry over the $1.5 million that was built into the final adopted budget for next year. So if there's any questions, happy to take those.
Thank you, Tom. Does anybody have any questions? I feel like we're all pretty up on what's happening with the budget at this point. Excellent. Okay, thank you so much, Tom. And then we have, lost my thing again. Oh, we have committee and representative reports. So Erica, do you want to go first since the SPED ad hoc evening?
Yes, I will. Okay, so I'll start with the ad hoc agenda for tonight. Started with the NSPED PAC presentation of their 2019-2020 report. As a reminder to the board, the NSPED PAC was brought together as a collaborative effort between parents and educators to research and examine the best way to deliver services to our special ed children. Their focus for the 2019-2020 report was to emphasize the need for communication and compliance moving forward. They touched on the report communication that cut across cadence, best practices, formats, language, translation needs, and with regard to compliance, data collection, caseloads, and professional development. The full report was included in the packet for tonight's meeting. And I just want to give a special shout out to the executive team that joined us this evening to present that report, and the 21 voting council members on the NSPED PAC, 13 parents and guardians, and 17 educators, 1 community member. Also on our agenda this evening was an ESY update, which was also included in our packets. We covered everything from the ratio of students to teachers, transportation, health regulations and compliances. And the next item was the social justice initiatives, which Yvette and I touched upon briefly in tonight's presentation. And should I cover sports liaison? You want to circle back to that, Sarah?
Why don't you just do it now?
All right. An update from the McMahon and Norwalk Athletics Departments is that they have a sports registration platform now available called Final Forms online. If you need access to that and you don't have it, you can reach out to the board and we'll get you your access. Meals on McMahon finished up their effort with raising $23,500, made 460 deliveries, and provided 1,912 meals. So thank you to our coaches and the staff and the students who came together to deliver meals to the community.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Erica. Sherelle, do you want to go for curriculum committee?
So, hold on. I just want to make sure. Can you guys? Yeah, I just want to make sure I wasn't muted. Mine is very, very quick. I just want to commend Dr. Myers and her team for listening to the community and for working with the health department and the mayor and his staff to create a summer program that I think will work for all, for those who are concerned about sending their children to school, for those who just want, distance learning. So I just want to commend that team, for coming up with something that I think works overall for most people. And as far as early childhood, they put together what I think is a very comprehensive questionnaire for providers in order to, find out what their staffing issues were during COVID, what their financial issues were during COVID, and what they will need post-COVID. And I think it's going to really give them the information that they need to support the people who support our littlest constituents.
Excellent. Let's see. Finance committee, do you want to go?
Sure. Obviously, the contracts and the budget that were part of the agenda tonight were the bulk of our work. But I want to recognize the work that the finance executive team did to really empower the SGCs to express what they wanted to achieve and how they were going to budget to get there. And that communication between the SGCs and the board was a really new and exciting feature of the budget process this year. And I hope that we can continue to keep a structure like that in place and perhaps extend it also to our facilities maintenance planning. So also the PTOC, I just want to thank all the volunteers from the PTOs across the city who were volunteering their time to pick up meals and deliver them to families who didn't have cars. That was an incredibly noble and generous thing to do at a time when people were scared to leave their homes. These people were leaving their homes, going to a place that could be risky, and going many other places as well. So thank you to the PTOs. You pivoted from your usual core values and work to a whole new level of awesomeness. I also want to share that Norwalk Acts had a convening this morning, and they are doing such great work. They are digging right into the conversation about equity and diversity and anti-bias work. They had very powerful breakout sessions today to talk about how people are feeling and what kind of tangible actions they're trying to produce in their organizations to move forward in this moment in time, which is so exciting, because there are things that we've all known for a long time, but we're starting to see actual change and tangible change. And I think we have to be grateful that Norwalk Acts and all of its many, many members, I think we're at 70 or 90 people on the call, we're digging into that work today and how that's going to ripple out into the city. I do want to introduce a few new people. We know Jennifer Barahona, the executive director, has now been there for a year and has made a huge impact. She's hired Jesse, and forgive me if I get the name wrong, Buccalo, who will be working on college and career, and more importantly to me, policy. So he can work with us in our advocacy for things at the state and federal level as well, which is great. MJ Corona has come on for community engagement after doing a great job of mapping out our SEL landscape. Ray Leslie is joining the team, and Ana Elena Moreno is coming to a more, she was an intern this year and she's moving up to a more permanent position. And I want to just thank Paula Palermo in particular for her amazing data work to support the district. We're also welcoming Emily Bianchi, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering names, and Stephen Restrepo, as well as Jennifer Walsh and Danique Lewis, Danique Weidmana Lewis, who we've worked with in the past from positive, help me, positive behaviors. Somebody knows. It's getting late and I've got mommy brain, but to have this many people with this many different skill sets looking at the systemic problems in Norwalk and how to solve them and how to build the coalitions to get there, this is incredible. Like we just put rocket packs on the back of Norwalk to achieve true change and true equity, and I'm very excited about this work. So I hope everybody can take time to sit down with these folks and share your thoughts and help be part of that. Also, I just wanted to share from the Cooperative Education Services, Chip Dumais is on the RATS, the regional, it's sort of the reopening committee for our region. And he has said that anyone who has any questions or input, they can reach out through him. And especially now that this is becoming more of a state-led decision process, he will be an important liaison for us to address any issues that we're concerned about, having been one of the top cities to experience large impacts of COVID-19. I think that's everything. I'm not sure. Hopefully.
If it's not, you'll tell us, I know. Okay. Heidi, did you want to do a quick policy update?
Sure. Actually, the biggest news was passing the remote learning policy. So I wanted to thank the board for that. And that took up a lot of time on policy, which was well needed. And I'm glad that we did our due diligence and did that. But I'm actually having a meeting tomorrow with Dr. Costanzo, and we've got some bunch of ideas moving forward on the next couple of policies that we're going to be working on. So during our next meeting, I'll delve into that and share that news. But that's it right now.
Awesome. Okay. Are there any other committees or liaisons that haven't reported besides me? Facilities Committee has not met since the last time we had a meeting. And negotiations and personnel met in executive session. So can we pivot to board member announcements? Should we do that? Okay. My board member announcement is that since we have been, during this pandemic, every Sunday I've been doing a jazz brunch, and I've been raising money for various local and national charities. And I am up to over $1,000 that I have raised for different charities by playing music. And last week we did the NAACP Legal Defense and Education
Congratulations.
Fund. I'm really psyched about it. It makes me feel like I've been doing something, you know, beyond. I know all of us on the board are here on the board to make positive social change, right? Like I know that's why we're all here. But it's nice to see a dollar amount actually climb in a tangible way. And that's my board member announcement, I think. I think that's all I got. Diana, what's your board member announcement? Got anything?
Just busy, like you said, helping the community with mutual aid, Ayuda Mutual, helping feed families actually in Norwalk. And I know that Erica helped out this weekend too, and she opened up her home as a drop-off for food donations. So we started with one weekend, we fed 45 families. The following weekend was 75. 2 weeks ago was 90, and I'm not sure what the number is going to be for this Saturday, but it's getting bigger, and I like that we're helping people in our own community. And we have students that have been volunteering, bringing food, packaging, deliveries. My son does deliveries, and my son also has done deliveries for school lunches. So we're all putting in our time and helping others.
That's awesome. Does anyone else in particular have a board member announcement that they'd like to share? But do that instead of going around through everybody. Does anybody have anything? Colin, you've been.
I have a share.
Oh, go ahead,
Colin.
No, Cheryl, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I can't see anyone, so I don't want to interrupt. So mine is not an I, it's more of a we. The Norwalk Public Library, in collaboration with the city, will be offering COVID testing at our main library on Thursday. I believe it's 8:30 to 11:30. And it's walk up or drive in.
That's awesome.
It's very awesome. And I want to give kudos to Lamont Daniel.
Awesome. He's been doing a lot of really excellent work during this time and before that too.
Excellent, yes.
Does anybody else have any other board member announcements? Erica, go ahead.
I am working with the Mid-Fairfield Child Guidance Center to launch a sidewalk track program. We should launch it by the end of this week. It'll be a drive to donate $4, which will purchase it'll purchase 12 oversized Crayola chalks for the children in their program. For those of you who are familiar with the Mid-Fairfield Child Guidance Center, they provide mental health and community wellness services throughout Lower Fairfield County.
Awesome. Anybody else got anything else?
I do.
You got one more thing? Go ahead.
It's so, as we missed out on the opportunity of in-person science, I just want to make sure the community is aware of some great resources. So in my hometown, there's something called the Children's School of Science, and it's an experiential based learning program, but they can't have it this year. So instead, they're posting all of these scientific experiences online, and they're free. So you can go look at them and then go to Cap Pastor Beach and do the observations and then come back and interact with the other kids around the observations. So that's a great science opportunity that, it's a slightly different ecosystem in Cape Cod than it is here, but I think it still could inform. And then the other thing I wanted to make sure the public is aware of is a wonderful resource called homesciencetools.com, which has some really affordable science kits, not the like marketing packaged ones that are super expensive, but they literally just have these sort of brown bag lunch versions that are very exciting. And so they have a whole set that's quite affordable that's just kitchen science, and it's super fun. So I highly recommend people try and extend themselves to do some new stuff this summer that's fun and exciting.
I also piggyback on your recommendation for people to do new fun stuff that's exciting. Okay. Does anybody have any more board member announcements? We all good? Okay. So now we can go to approval of the minutes for May 5th and May 19th. Do we have any corrections? Anybody have any corrections for the minutes?
I'm embarrassed. I didn't read them yet.
You know what? I didn't hear you say that. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes for May 5th and May 19th? Funny. Erica motions. Can I have a second?
Second.
Diana, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I'm going to abstain because I didn't have time to read.
That's okay. So Barbara abstained. So it passes 7 with 1 abstention. Okie dokie. So with that, we have gotten through our entire agenda tonight, folks. I think we did a great job. We managed it in a lean 3 hours, and I'm happy to say goodnight to you all. Stephen, thank you so much for all of your work, And thank you for being part of your last board meeting as the superintendent of Norwalk Public Schools. Do you want to say anything to close us out before we adjourn?
Thank you, Sarah. It's been my pleasure, and maybe you'll just let me make the motion to adjourn tonight.
Do it.
Wait, there's one thing.
Oh no.
I think we have to thank Sarah for getting us through this year as our chair. This has been such a year from the moment that we had our new members sworn in, and the orientation and the upheaval in leadership, and then the pandemic. Sarah, thank you. You've been a calm voice in a storm. And I think it has given everybody reassurance and leadership in a time that we really needed it. Thank you very much.
You're here.
That's a really nice thing to say, and I appreciate it. And now I'm going to go like this. Stephen, would you like to make the motion to adjourn?
Yes, I would like to make a motion to adjourn. Happy trails and a good summer to everyone.
Exactly. May I have a second?
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. A.
It's 8 seconds. We all second.
Yeah.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.